Vyse is the latest agent in Valorant, and I have to say, to me she's one of the more interesting characters because of her lore and how unique she is because of her nature, right? The focus of the main story is Radianite, which is a substance which is being targeted by 3 organizations. First we have Valorant Protocol, who are the main guys, the agents. Then we have Kingdom, they are specialized in researching and experimenting with the substance. And finally, the Science of Hourglass, who are trying to hide Radianite from the rest of the world. That is vital information to understand Vyse as a character, because she started with Kingdom to end up with Valorant Protocol. As I was saying, Kingdom specializes with research and experimenting with the substance, and what they did, they created Redivores, which are creatures infused with the substance, and they end up being changed forever. In total, Kingdom lost 6 Redivores. 4 of them were stolen by Gecko on the map Sunset, where they have a facility, another one was killed in the Deadlock cinematic, and finally we have ZN35, who is unaccounted for, but what we know about it is that it can disguise itself in any kind of flora. People believe ZN35, the missing Redivore, is Vyse. And you might be thinking to yourself, how is that possible, because that description doesn't fit the current character. There isn't any hint of the current Vyse being able to hide herself in flora. And yes, that's true, because the current character controls metal. But what I'm going to tell you next will probably clear things up, or at least it did for me, and maybe you will think it's too theoretical, but I believe it makes sense. Omen is targeted by an assassin sent by Hourglass. This assassin is Iso, who ends up switching sides. He gives up locations of Hourglass bases, and then we end up on the Abyss map. That's where they find a bunch of artifacts, research and experiments. This is also where we find out that they perceive Omen as a monster. That's important for the next part. Abyss is a facility which contains a lot of containment cells, most likely for other test subjects, but the biggest one is outside of the main facility in an hourglass-shaped containment cell. During the takeover of Abyss, this containment cell is damaged and the subject inside the containment cell is freed. But how did that happen? I believe it happened this way. 3 bullets pierced the containment cell, and because the bullets are made out of metal, she was able to control that to create the Vyse and destroy the containment cell. If you play the map and you go inside the cell, you will find a flower made out of metal in the center of the cell. And you can also find a stuffed animal, but that doesn't mean anything, and that's because you can find a bunch of them scattered around the map, and you can also find other stuffed animals on different maps, so that's not relevant to the story. But how did she acquire these powers? Well, it is clear that they continued experiments on the Redivore, which was ZN35, to finally create Vyse. And bear in mind that these people, the Science of Hourglass, have more information about Radianite than anyone else. And if there are other test subjects, you can try to take their powers and give them to ZN35 to create something stronger. And finally, they create a human-like Redivore with superpowers, who is able to communicate like a human, which is completely different from a normal Redivore, which communicate through different means. But because she was subject to all kinds of experiments, as soon as she is free, she goes on to destroy a bunch of other Hourglass bases. After this, Valorant Protocol sends in a task force to capture her, and because Omen is perceived as a monster, he ends up wanting to talk to her because other people perceive her as a monster. What do I think is behind the mask? Now that's a very interesting question, because I believe she will take the mask off at one point. 100% it will happen, and it will be a hype moment. I believe she will be part of the movie, because they are trying to create a movie in the Valorant universe, but do not quote me on this, only if it happens. This reminds me of Genji taking the helmet off whenever he fights against Hanzo in Overwatch. Maybe you do not know this fight, but it was one of the best cinematics created by Blizzard. So maybe something similar will happen to her, she will take the mask off, and what we will see is most likely an evolved version of a Redivore. Exactly as I explained throughout all of this video, she went through a lot of experimentation to end up looking like a person. For now, I will keep it to a shorter version of the theories I have. I could go on and talk about details of what I believe could happen with the character, but maybe in another video if people like this one, of course. And yeah, subscribe to the channel.